Hi everyone, welcome to our first event as part of the Majlis conversation series. We're really pleased to be able to have this session with you all. We have some really exciting stories to share with you from Muslim professionals within the field of architecture. We hope and are confident that these stories will spark inspiration in you all, no matter what stage you are in your architecture career. We'll be introducing our speakers to you shortly, but before that, we wanted to tell you about who we are and what MWA is all about. My name is Kalsoum. I'm a Part 2 architectural assistant in London, and I'm joined with
Zahra Mansoor, and I'm an architectural designer based in the UAE.
And Tahin Khan, I'm a Part 2 architectural assistant in London, and we all met in the University of Westminster during our studies, and together we founded Muslim Women in Architecture.
Our official launch has only been 2 months ago, and we have been overwhelmed by the amazing support. A lot has happened in these past 2 months, from the protests sparked by police brutality against the Black community, to the ongoing ethnic cleansing of Uyghur Muslims in China, the devastation in Beirut, which was the title of the music piece that we heard while waiting in the beginning by Lebanese trumpeter Ibrahim Malouf, to the recent bombings in Gaza this past week, and obviously not to mention COVID-19 and its effects. We are a network and collective working to at least trying to empower, inspire and celebrate Muslim women in the architecture and built environment industry. With the disappointing results of the AJ's diversity report, organizations such as ours, as well as several others such as BFA, Resolve, Collective, Designed, Can, have become more and more necessary. And they will be necessary until the industry continues to use BAME and diversity merely as blanket statements. A recent trend buzzword that seems to be something that practices need to be rewarded or awarded recognition for. BAME does not cover the diverse ethnicities that exist within the British landscape nor the field of architecture.
Before we started MWA, we genuinely were under the impression that there were only a handful of Muslim women architects in the industry that we could actually look up to. And we assumed that there weren't many entering the profession to begin with. So through MWA, however, we have found the most amazing and diverse group of architects and designers that have done projects that we can truly learn from. And one of our attempts to start celebrating these women was through weekly forums that we call Majlis. Since the launch of This Space is Ours as part of LFA Digital 2020, we curated a virtual safe space via Zoom throughout the month of July. We were joined by people from the UK, the States, Canada, South Africa, Pakistan, India, Lebanon, and many, many more. The last 3 Majalis looked at the current spatial issues faced by various groups of people with a focus on Muslim women. These fell under the umbrella of unsafe spaces, safe spaces, and gender in space. We invited speakers from different backgrounds to present their research on these themes and included a reading list to engage the audience, which is still available on our Instagram bio. These presentations were followed by informed discussions preceded by questions we posed on Instagram, such as the ones that you see on the screen at the moment. What followed was an unraveling of personal stories and stories by women who have been victim to our urban landscape.
Some of the points that came up were lack of visibility and the importance of the openness, accessibility of public space. Sometimes visibility, especially for Muslim women felt less safe. In this instance, we spoke about perceived safety and how some neighborhoods are on the onset of change because they are perceived to be unsafe. In university, tutorials are meant to be safe spaces, and more often than not, studios are not capable of helping the student reach their potential because they understand architecture differently, or they experience space differently, or their values are different. A common narrative was that spaces that were meant to be safe were in fact unsafe. For example, women prayer spaces in mosques and institutions were usually an afterthought, and unfortunately, A lot of women sympathized with the fear of being pushed off the platform while waiting for the train, and therefore they were basically trying to stand behind the yellow line and closer to the wall. The concept of loitering or hanging out in certain neighborhoods or mobility outside of what is usual routine was also discussed. It brought light that informal spaces that are generally considered to be safe spaces for men are rarely ever created by women in the same capacity. Our fourth and final Majlis will look at the future of safe spaces, where we invite architects who are currently challenging the unjust and unsafe spaces within our communities through their research and architectural interventions with the public realm. You can find snippets of the previous Majlis leading up to the final one on the 4th of September through our Instagram account.
We realized through our efforts of creating a virtual safe space for Muslim women, the power of social media and actually being visible. We were able to connect to so many people, and we also realized with things being more online, we were able to gain a lot of opportunities such as this one. And we find that virtual space is something that will continue to be used as a safe space. And two of our guests this evening have worked immensely hard to create such a platform for students of architecture. We would like to open the discussion to you all during the last 10 to 15 minutes of this session and ask us any questions you like on the chat. Sana Tabassum is a young Part 1 architectural assistant and the founder of architectural platform To Scale. After graduating from the University of Greenwich, she began building her skills by starting a blog that empowers students and designers through advice, articles, and tutorials. She's also the editor-in-chief of To Scale magazine, a recent publication that aims to bring forward conversations about the power of the art community. Sana, do you want to take over?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you girls for having me on. It's great to be here. Yeah, as you said, I mean, To Scale is basically turned into from a blog into an architecture platform for students and young designers to come together and sort of voice their opinions and, you know, improve their writing or just learn something new. So, yeah.
Should we kickstart off with?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Can go ahead and start your presentation.
No, it was, we basically wanted to kind of discuss with Sana, like what your journey was within kind of the path or journey that you've taken to kind of lead up to the successful blog that you've got. So at the moment, you're almost like a couple of followers from 3,000. And it's just kind of what we'd like to hear more about, you know, how you've kind of taken that journey along. We've kind of spoken before, but
yeah.
share it with everyone else today.
Yeah, so I graduated last year from the University of Greenwich, so I completed my undergrad, and afterwards, after I graduated, I really wanted to start a blog, so it was always kind of in the back of my mind, and so I created To Scale, and it initially started off as just kind of tutorials and sort of advice articles about stuff I was experienced with. And as I went along over the months, I found that obviously I can't cover all the topics myself because I'm not as experienced as some other people. So I started to get some of the sort of community members and people who are really engaging with the platform to share their stories too. So they were sort of writing tutorials or writing, you know, about their experiences with dissertations and mental health. And so over the course of, I think, 12 months, it's kind of grown into a proper platform. And then that also kind of sparked To Scale magazine, which the theme for the first ever issue is community. And I think that's really important in, you know, obviously times like these. And the project is basically about getting together students from all over the world. So we had, you know, people from India, people from Australia, and they were literally sort of students and designers, and they all kind of worked together to create this issue. So I think it's also quite interesting because it highlights some of the sort of community members in architecture who are doing something like really good for the community. So Yeah, I think that's been the journey so far.
Amazing. And what kind of obstacles did you face whilst trying to grow your platform? Were there any kind of anything thrown at you, any kind of dilemmas that you had to deal with in the context of growing a blog and growing that kind of community? Like you have kind of a list of writers that are always there who kind of take part in
Yeah.
creating these articles, and obviously as editor-in-chief, you know, you've got other kind of issues that you have to deal with. So what kind of issues came up in the lead up to publishing the magazine, and how did you deal with those?
Right. So, you know, growing the blog, I think the main kind of issue I had was sort of questioning myself and thinking, you know, why would anyone kind of read what I have to say, really? And, you know, I was often hit with this kind of imposter syndrome, but I'm the kind of person who, you know, plans well ahead in time and, you know, writes out all these articles and then thinks about them really carefully. So obviously I was sort of, while doing the blog, I was also looking for a part one position. So I was often, you know, questioning myself, saying, I haven't even got professional experience yet. So how can I be sort of putting out this content? But I think overcoming that was trying to kind of understand that I don't need to be at a experienced position, because the audience that I'm trying to communicate with are students themselves. So they're in their first years, or sometimes they're even trying to apply for architecture. So I think whatever I have to say can be relatable in some sense. In terms of the magazine, I think the main kind of skill that I learned along the way was leadership. So I think, you know, generally I'm a really shy person anyway. So it was quite a steep learning curve when I had to kind of, you know, politely talk to people, and then once the kind of deadline started rolling in, I had to sort of push them and say, you know, I need this by so and so. So in that sense, it was kind of building my own confidence, because obviously I was in charge of the project, so it was all kind of up to me. But I think now that it's kind of all over, it was a really fun experience, and it gave me the opportunity to grow myself as well.
And congrats again on your magazine, on the launch of your magazine. Do you want to tell everyone where they can find it?
So they can find it directly on our website. That's toscaleblog.co.uk. You can just read it online. It's a digital publication, but we've also got a number of people who have supported us and bought a physical copy too. So that really turned out great as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sana, for sharing just a bit of insight into your journey. Just so it's not easy, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're gonna now be speaking to Hamza. And Hamza
Hello.
has been nodding his head while Sana was talking, so he could relate, obviously from within the field of you know, the whole blogging and podcasting and reaching out to communities within the social media. So Hamza, tell us a little bit more about what you do. Actually, would you like, let me introduce you. So Hamza Shaikh recently graduated from the University of Westminster, where his final year master's project explored the prospects of creating a restorative retreat and research centre for London's commuter population. The project contributes to his archive of work that investigates the field of architectural psychology, and it was also featured on Design Boom. Congrats. He is the founder of the research and design initiative Two Worlds Design, which showcases his ongoing research and acts as a platform to engage with the illustrative Instagram community. As part of Two Worlds Design, he also produces and hosts a one-of-a-kind architecture podcast series where he uncovers the multidisciplinary aspect of architecture by speaking to some of the leading practitioners in the field. He also recently co-founded the MAD Collective alongside Sana, along with other content creators, in order to address the common issues faced by young architects and students across the globe. So, Hamza. Would you like to
Hello,
talk more?
yes,
How are
okay.
you?
Well, first of all, assalamu alaikum, peace be on everyone here. It's nice to be able to start the conversation like that. I'm good, by the way, thank you. I hope you're good as well. And it's kind of nerve-wracking to be around so many women and being the only. But actually, I did browse and I did see a couple of males, and I think I saw Shahid Salim in there as well, who is somewhat of a mentor of mine, I would consider. So, yeah, I guess, look, thanks for the intro. Thanks for inviting me. You guys just heard from an amazing person who I work with, Sana, who didn't actually get to tell you about the Mad Collective, but maybe I can quickly tell you about that at the end or something.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, my journey's been, I guess, quite long, because I started Two Worlds Design when in my foundation year, which was before I even started my architectural course. I was always kind of eager to start some sort of entrepreneurial venture that harnessed a design, something to do with design. And so Two Worlds Design actually started off as a clothing brand and a clothing line. It was always premised and kind of, it had a deeper design philosophy behind it. So I was easily able to translate that into architecture once I started to take that a bit more serious, which funnily enough was about, I almost failed my first year of architecture, and then I kind of switched on and ended up doing, quite well. So my journey's been pretty smooth, I guess. It's been long and obviously difficult, and I think Two Worlds Design is at the moment kind of in a really good place. It's starting to become a little bit more recognized as a kind of actual research and design initiative. Obviously, I think as I grow and mature as a designer and architect, I think the brand itself is, and obviously you guys mentioned the podcast. The podcast kind of acts as a, it acts in of itself as a research tool for my kind of platform. At the same time, it's also a strange kind of marketing tool as well. But the best thing about the podcast for me is I'm able to sit down with incredible people and pick their brains and share it with other people. So yeah, I don't. Please tell me if you want me to talk about specific things, but I guess I can kind of start to talk about how, because I remember we talked about how maybe what caused me to get onto that journey as a kind of Muslim in architecture. Is that what you wanted to hear?
Yeah, that would be great to hear your insight on that.
Well, I was actually, I guess, from the fact that we're talking about my identity as a Muslim, I was never really practicing Muslim, or never really, I guess, identified primarily as a Muslim. Early on in my, I guess, architectural studies. And funnily enough, I guess, sort of once I started to take my architecture serious, I also started to take my spiritual kind of belief and practice a bit more serious as well. And I think they kind of went hand in hand. And I think coming back to practicing my kind of spiritual outlook on things really actually helped me in many ways to be a very focused person and motivated. So I do put it down to actually being a Muslim as to, why I think I worked so hard and was able to manage, doing quite well at university, and at the same time building this brand, and at the same time starting this podcast. So I don't actually have anything to say that would say, I faced any major, problems as a Muslim. But I did hear you guys talk about, the prayer spaces. And that's an interesting thing, because during architecture school, obviously, as a practicing Muslim, I would be wanting to pray probably 2 or 3 times during the actual studio day. So finding a good quality prayer room was often quite difficult. But, it doesn't, personally, I don't think, I personally wouldn't really complain. However, if I was to, have the ideal circumstance, then yeah, it would be nice to be able to have something which is, I guess, a bit more emphasis on what certain students in universities may want to do as spiritual practice. But I guess that in of itself is a difficult conversation. given how rare, you know, religious ritual is.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much for that, Hamza, for sharing with us your journey. And one thing that I just wanted to, you know, emphasize on was how you said that where you started from was just, you know, To Azam was a clothing brand, and look where it is now. It's like completely changed into something else. It obviously had that creative spark and interest in the start, but I remember when we had the conversation, you mentioned not knowing where things are going to lead off to, but just start anyways and see how things turn out. Thank you, Hamza, for that.
Yeah.
So we're going to just move on now, and our next speaker is Anjum Khan. So Anjum Khan was born and raised in Oxford, who then moved to London after her bachelor's. She completed her MArch this year, achieving a distinction, and she's here to break boundaries and stereotypes. She went back to pursue her master's after taking a 12-year gap between her part 1 and part 2. Welcome, Anjum.
Thank you very much.
How are
Welcome
you?
and hi to everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, so where do you want to start?
Where do you want to start? Anjum, well, we've had a conversation with Anjum. We met Anjum at our first, I think it was our first.
Yeah, your first one, that's correct.
Yeah, as part of LFA. And Anjum stayed behind at the end of the talks that were delivered, and we had this amazing conversation. And Anjum, let's go. Tell us more about your background and why you took that 12-year gap, and just how you basically overcame any barriers that you faced from
So I started off my architecture journey like every other student. I was on my tunnel vision to go do my part 1, then go off and do my work, and then go do part 2, and then continue and get to part 3 and eventually become an architect. But things were actually planned different for me. So I ended up meeting my husband in the summer after my graduation, and shortly after that I started a family, and we had 4 children. We have 4 children, and that is the main reason I have the substantial gap in between my part 1 and part 2. But having that gap in the back of my mind, I always had this kind of urge and passion to continue my pursuit of architecture. And the main reason I chose not to do both parallelly was because I didn't really want to spread myself too thin, because I wanted to take that time and spend that time with my children while they're young, because that was one of my personal aspirations, to always be around my children when they were younger, which enabled us to do a lot in terms of traveling and experiencing lots of different things together. But then came a point where I was just like, okay, I think I might be ready, but you can never be ready for part 2, which I have, you know, realized very, very recently. So then, yeah, I decided that I wanted to go to a few open days. And at one of the open days, the gentleman who was the head of architecture was just like, oh, you can take an application form and, you know, you can sign up today. I was just like, okay, let's go a bit slower, because that is just too much for me right now. I haven't worked, I haven't got any professional experience. I don't know what this entails, how much commitment it will take for me. So then I went away and I thought about it, and I eventually did apply, and I managed to get a place. So I went to the University of East London, and on interview days, everyone has, you know, their presentations, and everyone does, the tutors sell their unit as such, and I really wanted to go for the one that was the most digitally based, software heavy unit. And this is after taking a substantial gap, and from coming from an undergrad where we were mainly focused on doing hand drawings and work which was not so much heavy on software. So this was something that I knew would be a challenge, and I still decided to go for it, because that was the unit that everybody lines up for, and you have to wait for the whole day to find out whether you get a space or not, and then you have to go for your other choices.
Which unit was it?
Sorry?
Which unit was it?
It was Unit 6. Unit 6. So thankfully I got into Unit 6, but it was a very, very steep learning curve. And with masters, as many of you know, the pace is just intense compared to your bachelor's, and you are just constantly on a treadmill at like 100 miles per hour. You're learning, you're understanding, you're approaching, and you've got your next deadline. So that was my journey from bachelor's to master's. And this year has actually been quite exceptional, because when it came to March, we were hit by the pandemic, and that was another great challenge for us, because you're so used to kind of working in a studio format. You have like work, and then you have home, and you have time to disconnect. So that was another thing that just added to my crazy life as such. So yeah, no, the main thing was that I think architecture is just something that I really, really enjoy, and I'm really happy to come back to it and see so many more diverse faces, and a lot more, say, hijabis per se, because when I was studying initially, it was only me, and later on I met one other girl. So it's just been a very, very interesting journey, but it all comes with kind of your own experiences and what you want in life as well. So I think it's just important, like if you do enjoy architecture, or if you think this is something for you, to really go for it. And like my kind of ethos is, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it properly, and I'm going to aim for the best. And it may be the most difficult thing, but you learn so much and you grow so much from it, so it's really beneficial. So yeah, that was my journey so far.
It's amazing. And one thing we touched upon was, with the pandemic and COVID, you had to work from home for a certain time, away from university, and we realized afterwards it's a luxury almost to be able to go into university and have that studio space. So how did you, it would be good for you to kind of tell us more about how you kind of managed your priorities and your time with children, and with having that family, but also university, but everything was kind of condensed into one space, because not many part 2 students, you hear that they have to kind of juggle a family and studying all from one space. So how did you manage to kind of do all that?
I think initially it was a bit challenging to find a workspace that was just mine, because as the children were off school also, they had to work online, and we were kind of hot desking together. But that doesn't work, because everyone's just like walking in when you're in your kind of zone of needing to, refine something. So it was just a bit of sort of testing and working out what works best. But I think one of the most important things was to, almost like in studio, rebuilding and reconnecting with your peers, and also taking specific time out to just disconnect from everything and just recharge your batteries and refresh, and then go back at it, but work really effectively. Because it's not always about how long you work, it's more about how smart you work and how effective you are with your time. Because you can get something done maybe in 4 hours, which you may prolong out. For example, in uni, you may take, a whole 6-7 hours, but you're going for a coffee, you're having a casual chat, the normal kind of vibe. So I think it was very difficult, because for all of us it was intense to kind of be creative with such a bizarre situation around us, because there's very sad stories about family members or extended friends or whatnot. So it just took a transitional period of learning to cope with, actually our deadline is not extended, we still have to be creative, and I still want to get that distinction. I don't want to lower the bar, because this is our only shot. And for us as 5th years, it was challenging, but as soon as we kind of came into a new sync, everyone was back on like working as hard as they could, really. So yeah, it was just interesting, because we never experienced it before.
I think Zahra has a question.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that one of the things that came up was in our communities and our backgrounds, we generally find that once you're married, it's difficult to get that encouragement in some ways to pursue your careers. So how did you deal with that? Or was it never a thing?
I think generally that is the case with the communities that a lot of us are surrounded by. I think initially it does sometimes take a toll on you, because when you see, for example, your friends who are becoming, progressing, and they've done their part 3, or they're becoming senior architects or lecturers or other things that potentially, could have been you. I think it's more about refocusing and remembering that everyone has their own journey. And thankfully, we're quite fortunate that architecture doesn't really have a retirement age. So there's no kind of race in that sense. Like, it's take it at your pace, but do whatever you do and do it really well. Like when you're with your family, be with your family. And when you're working or, you're studying, it is a challenge. I'm not saying it's a walk in the park at all by any means. But just remember that even if communities say something, as long as your partner or your close, knit family members or friends support you and you have that network, then anything is possible. And it's really, I think, good for the children to also see that it's not all about them. Like, I have my own passion, my own dreams, my own things. So when they see me, they can have no excuse to be like, no, mama, we don't want to do this. But come on, I did it, you did it, you have to do it now.
No, I think at all.
It's tough, but I think you just learn with time to just rub things off, and you just got to go for what you want to do.
Amazing. Thank you, Anjum. That's amazing insight into your journey so far. Thank you for that. So next we're joined with Rayan Elnayal. She is a Sudanese Part 2 architecture assistant and artist based in London. Her thesis project, A Magic Realist Afrabia, explores ideas on magic realism, multiculturalism in architecture and design. Since graduating from the University of Greenwich, Rayan has held 2 solo exhibitions on the project and hopes to continue exploring these topics via her research and drawings. So, salam Rayan.
Salam. How are you guys?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you
for inviting me to this amazing panel.
Thanks for joining us. So Rayan, would you care to share with us all your journey and how you kind of based on the conversation that we had recently, if we could get a bit more insight and overview on that at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So for me, I think my interest in architecture was kind of started probably as when I was very small, when I visited Sudan. I used to visit Sudan every year. And I loved Sudan. I loved the city of Khartoum. And and that kind of stayed with me. And then in school, when I was about 14 or 15, in year 10, when you go and do your 2 weeks work experience, I was actually lucky enough to do it at Barratt Homes, who are developers. And that was because of my school. My school had like kind of director of businesses where they would send people to these different headquarters around Brentford, where I live. And I told them, oh, I'm interested in architecture. I think I'm interested in architecture. And so 14, 15-year-old me got to like kind of visit sites and visit and listening to important meetings and things like that. So that was like my insight into architectural practice. And I think for me, that was like a turning point. I think I was very lucky to have that experience, because I think in schools, sometimes architecture is not made a kind of an accessible career choice, as much as other careers may be. I still don't know of that many people who studied architecture from my school. So that was a turning point for me, and that's when I decided I wanted to study architecture. And then I did my BA at the University of Greenwich, and did my Part 1 experience at somewhere called Helix Architecture for a year, and then did 2 years masters at University of Greenwich again, I loved my time at Greenwich, so I was really adamant on going back. And my final thesis project, like you said, was a Magic with Arabia, which is where I started really actually exploring my kind of initial interest in Sudanese architecture. And that's when I started developing thoughts and ideas on magic realism in architecture. Yeah, that's how those two exhibitions happened, really. So for me, my journey ended with a Magic with Arabia, but I enjoyed that year so much that I kind of continued drawing after. But to get to that project and to start with that type of project in a school or in a profession where I couldn't find that many people that looked like me, it was quite difficult. I constantly, doubted myself and thought, well, I can't do well with this project. I'm talking about Sudanese architecture, for goodness sake. Who knows about Sudan? How are any of these teachers going to recognize what I'm talking about? But actually, it worked out well for me. In the end, I did graduate with a first. I did at one point think I'm not going to do well, but this is what I want to do, so I'm just going to do it. So if I have like kind of any advice to people who do want to explore architecture that's not Eurocentric or Western centric, then I'd say, do it, because I was surrounded in university with people who did explore ideas that weren't kind of void of any identity or any culture. They just chose to do it for it to be Eurocentric or, from where they were from. And so I thought, why can't I do the same? And so that was me. And then after graduating, I got to exhibit at Magic Realistic Arabia P21, and then at Rich Mix as part of AWAN, which is Arab Women Artists Now. And so yeah, it's been a good post-graduation experience.
Does anyone have any questions from MWA?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that we talked about was how you wanted to retell Sudanese, the story of Sudan through your work, and that in some ways Arab realism or futurism was always considered to be Dubai-based. Like you look at Dubai and the buildings, and that's what it is. But it's more than that. There's so many artists and architects that design differently. Yeah. And Dubai's landscape or skyline is considered mainly Western.
Yeah. Well, for my project, I kind of decided that I was going to move away from the idea of modernism or a unifying kind of aesthetic that is just Eurocentric. And so for me, including Arab futurism or Afro-Arab futurisms as a topic to explore was a means for me to stop encouraging that, because for me, Khartoum, Sudan, I see those as modern cities, not primitive, not vernacular. And so for me, exploring that idea was very, very important. And so actually, I think my thesis visually kind of avoided any Eurocentric, no Bauhaus, no Le Corbusier there. So it was a little bit difficult to kind of drop. I don't know, you kind of have, with each project, you have this background of knowledge on and maybe the site or the culture, and I had that, but how do I express that to the people who are marking my portfolio? And one way I did it was I actually went to Sudan for 3 weeks and took photographs from around 3 cities, and I had actually printed them and bound them in a small book that supported my portfolio. That's one way I was like, okay, here's the Sudanese aesthetic that I'm talking about, and it had, again, no references of Dubai. It was resisting the idea that modernism that non-Western modern buildings had to resemble the West or what's happening in the West. They can still be futuristic in their own terms.
I have a question actually, Rayan, and that is, was it easy to basically get your work out there? You know, publishing your work and on your social media, for example, and taking pride and ownership of it.
To be honest, I kind of just celebrated my own work, because I felt like I'd worked quite hard on my thesis and my portfolio for me to not celebrate it, or for me to not consider it as also artwork. And so one of the first things I did after graduation was submit it for a competition at the P21 Gallery. And that's how I got the first exhibition. And the first exhibition, you know, led to the second. And then it led to, you know, a few other opportunities. So I think the uniqueness of the project maybe helped, but that wasn't probably as hard as actually building the courage to start that project. Because I kept thinking, well, I'm going to fail, you know, because it's not, you kind of have to accept the fact that not everyone is going to understand your project, and that's okay.
Do you think that maybe it was helpful that you had tutors that understood or kind of encouraged the uniqueness? Or because I definitely have had, you know, both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I had very supportive tutors. I don't think I would have pursued that project without them. They were fully supported. They never, you know, thought once that I shouldn't do it. My tutor Rahesh Ram from Unit 12, he is all for kind of these projects. And the way he sees it, I think, and the way I saw it was, your final thesis project should be something that you'd be happy to explore, you know, for another 5-10 years. And so that's why I picked the project. And that's why I got to a stage where I was like, I get whatever grade I want to get, because I'm happy that I finally got to do this project. And if I'm honest, it was a project that I wanted to do since first year, but it took me that long to develop the courage to just go for it. And actually, through doing those exhibitions, I enjoyed doing them so much, because I got to meet people who were Sudanese, who were Arab, who had written on the topic. I even met someone who had worked with Edward Said, who wrote Orientalism. Yeah, who's just, you know, roaming around the gallery. So I kind of, I see it as, you know, we're architecture students, we develop all these skills, and we're quite good actually at creating visual content. So why not put it out there and celebrate it?
Amazing. Thank you, Rayan, for the insight into your journey. Really inspiring. And where can we find more of your work and art pieces? Would Instagram be the best place to go to?
Yes, Instagram, Rayan Elnayal, and rayanelnayal.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You might want to just type that into the chat so kind of people are directed to that. And we've got Sana's as well to scale, and Hamza, if you put your any links to your podcasts or the Mad Collective in the chat, so everyone kind of goes and checks out what you guys are up to as well. So next we're joined with Tumpa Husna Yasmin Fellows. She is a chartered architect and had over 10 years of experience working for London-based award-winning architecture practices before co-founding the interdisciplinary practice Our Building Design in 2018 and the charity Mannan Foundation Trust in 2012. She was awarded the Royal Institute of British Architects Rising Star Award in 2017, and she has received a commendation for the Reba President's Award for Research in 2019. In 2018, the Rajpur Center project received the Seed Pacific Rim Community Design Network Award, which Tumpa has led. Research and teaching in that field, she's been a senior lecturer at the University of Westminster, where her teaching draws on her research methodologies on interdisciplinary approach to design. She is also a PhD candidate undertaking practice-based research which focuses on participatory methods on architectural responses to the changing climate, landscape and social practices. Tumpa has been appointed to be on the design review panel for the Southwark Council Planning Department, which is an advisory role in June 2019. So if we can all welcome Tumpa. Hi Tumpa.
Hi,
Oh.
yeah, it's me. Hello. Yes, I'm fine, alhamdulillah. I want to start by Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to follow the other. Peace be upon you. I just want to thank Architecture Foundation for hosting this event. This is such a wonderful platform, and also congratulate MWA for creating this platform and allowing these really talented, quiet voices to be able to express, their journeys and their stories, and to share it with all of us. Before I start talking about myself, because I was so inspired by all the other panels, I'd just like to highlight the common thread amongst all of the stories that we've heard, that they all seem to have taken an element of risk in their journey, in their stories, which is what led to these, to their success. And it really highlighted that, if you follow your passion, you will lead to a successful journey. And if you don't, it doesn't matter, because you've gone through that journey and something else will open up. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your stories, everyone. I'm very inspired. Yeah. My story is not as interesting, unfortunately.
Oh. I just want to say that everyone's story is so amazing and unique, and I think that's the beauty in it. And Tumpa, I mean, the last thing we want to hear is you say that your story isn't interesting, because it's inspired us when we've heard it. So yeah. I'm sure it's going to have the same effect on everyone else when they listen in.
Okay. I actually followed quite a traditional route. When I hear these guys talk about how, after part one, they started a blog and did all these things, unfortunately, I don't have stories like this. I wanted to be an artist, as we talked about before, but because I think a lot of people can relate to this story, the background that I'm from, my parents, encouraged me not to become an artist, because they wanted me to have a job, have a career, and have something that would have an income. Something that would have a professional title. I think that's what they were pushing towards. So I decided to become an architect because I thought it would allow me to express myself creatively, and also has this professional title. And then, so I studied in London at the Bartlett for my part one, and then I did a year out at a London practice, and then I went back to the Bartlett to do my part two, and then I graduated, and it was the year of the recession, which is quite, I guess, the situation that I found myself in is quite similar to some of the graduates now who might be finding it difficult to find a job. So I joined the practice immediately after I graduated, and the recession hit within 2 months of me being in the practice. And I was made redundant because the practice was basically reducing the size by half. And I was one of the first ones to be made redundant because I was the last one to be in. And that really threw me. I just, I felt very discouraged by that. And for 3 months, I couldn't find a job in architecture. So what I did was I looked everywhere, and I joined, I got a job as a teaching assistant at a secondary school in London. And while I was looking for jobs, I did that job. And looking back, I think that one of the unique opportunities and experience that I've gathered from doing that job was working with people, working with young people, and really putting yourself out there and being confident to stand in front of class of very, they were 15 and 16-year-olds, so they were at an age where they're very I would say, challenging age. And I myself was very young as well. So that was a very difficult and challenging situation, but I've learned so much from that, which has actually helped and fed towards my my dream that I pursued later on. And then I got a job 3 months later in an architecture firm, and I carried on working, did my part 3. And after I did my part 3, I wanted to do something completely different, because I just followed that traditional route, and I just, something inspired me to pursue my own interest, which was to help people preferably through architecture, but I didn't know how to start that. So the first thing I wanted to do was wanted to find my roots, and I'm from Bangladeshi background. So I wanted to go to Bangladesh and visit the village that my father is from. My father had passed away when I was quite a long time when I was a child. So I wanted to, I guess, reconnect with my roots. So I went back to Rajapur. This is a village in Bangladesh, in the Chandpur district, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, and I started to volunteer at the local primary school. I was teaching English. I stayed with long distance relatives, and there was a seed that was sown in my heart that I wanted to work with this community, because there was a lot of issues, social and climate issues that they were facing, and I saw myself as an architect, because that's what you're trained to do. You at School of Architecture, you're problem solving. And I immediately found myself in the role of an architect, while I was actually not, I didn't go there to do any architectural project. And I started doing these participatory projects with the community, talking with them, and yeah, doing these workshops. It was amazing doing these workshops. All of a sudden, they wanted to tell me their stories, and also that helped me reconnect with my roots as well. I know more about my father and where he grew up. So when I came back to London, and I took an annual leave to do that. So, I had to come back to my job full-time job in London. Myself and my sisters, who are doctors, by the way, my parents would have loved me to be a doctor as well, because that is that's preferred profession within the Asian community. So my sisters and I, we discussed some of the issues, so the lack of access to medical care in the community in Rajpur, the lack of access to education. There's only one primary school. Secondary school is really far away. So immediately the girls in the community stopped going to school after primary level, because they're not encouraged to travel to go to school. So we wanted to work with the community to address some of these issues. And so we co-founded a Mannan Foundation Trust, which is a charity, UK-based charity, and it's named after my father, Professor Abdul Mannan. And so yeah, it all started from 2012 when we registered the charity, and since then, we've done many projects with the community, and we offer free healthcare, free education for children, and especially for women, to enable them to have income generating skills to have self-sufficiency. And that's where the Rajapur Centre came about. The building project that we worked on, which we delivered, is where everything is hosted. So all the health camps, all the education programs are hosted. At the same time, while I did worked on the Rajapur Centre building project, I was a full-time employee of a London-based practice. So I was doing that full-time and doing the charity work in the weekends and evenings. And then in 2018, I wanted a change of direction. After we delivered the project, I wanted to do the charity project more. So I resigned. I did something really bold. I resigned for my job, and I started my own practice, and I've taken up a teaching post, part-time teaching post. I'm teaching at the University of Westminster currently, and also my research carried on, and it's now embedded in my PhD. So yeah, this is where I am at, I guess.
Amazing. Zahra, do you have anything to add on to that, or do you want me to?
I think there's some questions maybe you want to take on.
Zahra, you're on mute. So.
I said you can go on.
Yeah, I think Shah had made a mention. He's got a question. There is a heightened awareness of racism and discrimination in architecture at the moment.
Yeah.
Is there a specific form of discrimination in the industry and education against Muslim women that differs from other forms of racism? Hello, Shahid.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Nice to see you. Yeah, well,
See you too. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Nice to see you all. I was wondering where you'd all got to. Keeping busy, obviously.
So, Shahid, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone, actually?
Yeah. Is my sound okay? There isn't like a big hiss in the background.
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly
well. So I teach architecture at the University of Westminster, and I've taught Zahra and had sort of dealings with a number of other of you in different ways. And I've taught quite a lot of Muslim women in my time in Westminster. So that's my sort of experience of, and I was quite interested when you guys set this up to what it is, what the issues are and how you're going to position it and what you're kind of dealing with. So my question is related to that. Is there a specific sort of experience of discrimination that Muslim women as a category face that differs from other types of racism?
I think, Tumpa, we touched upon it slightly before this event. You might want to share kind of your experience within that, because you've kind of had first-hand experience when you was working in practice.
Yeah, the fact that there is an underrepresentation of Muslim women in architecture, I think says a lot, because I found there so many obstacles during the years that I worked in practices, and I can see that some people would be disheartened and completely give up architecture and not follow it through, like not go through the whole part 3. One of the main ones that I've experienced was when I got to after my post part 2 and I wanted the right experience for part 3. That was very difficult to get because practices allocate certain projects which would be suitable for part 3 to their favorite ones, and unfortunately I was never in that group, so it was very difficult. It took me years of, I lagged behind compared to my other peers who joined at the same time as me, who happened to be white male or white female. I can't prove that it's because I'm a Muslim woman that's why this happened, but it's just, it is a common story. It does happen amongst a lot of other people like me that I've spoken with. And the other things after part 3 that I struggled with is being visible in the key moments of the project. So for example, if there is a key meeting with the client, you're told to stay behind. You've done all this work, it's your project, but you're told, we will take over and we'll present. It's a very important meeting and we will do that. And there is no explanation for that. Why am I not able to be present in this meeting, for example? So yeah, so those are little subtle things that really grind on you, because you think, hang on, I've done all this work. I'm just as capable, if not more capable, of explaining my own projects, which I've led. I can see this could hold people back from their, progressing and hitting the glass ceiling. If you don't have this, if you don't get the right opportunity, you will fall behind in promotion, you'll fall behind in pay rise, you'll fall behind in getting the right experience in the future. So yeah, that's my own personal experience.
Can I ask, keep going? Is that a question? Or can I come back to you, Tumpa, on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because what I'm wondering is, so what you're describing, for example, is it could be sort of a common type of racism that many people experience in the industry and in in academia. And I mean, Islamophobia has been described and is largely accepted, understood as a kind of acceptable form of racism. And it's something, and race and Islamophobia exists at a much more sort of everyday level in public discourse, political media, television, and so on. And it goes unnoticed and kind of goes unchecked. And what I'm wondering is, obviously, you know, everybody's aware of that and is subjected to that. As Muslim women, do you feel that you are sort of discriminated against on a number of levels, a kind of number of intersectional levels, female, of color, Muslim, and how do you, if that's the case, what are you going to do? How are you going to deal with that?
That's a good question. I mean, I actually did confront my immediate boss that I was working with, and he was very sympathetic because he was on my side and he did support me, but he had pressures from the partners who had an idea about how to represent their practice, and I didn't fall under that image. And how do you deal with that? I don't know. I guess I was too powerless to do any more than confront at a one-to-one level. But I mean, I think RIBA could play a bigger part in this. And I think, just as RIBA had taken a stance on climate change and making some of the issues compulsory for the accredited practices to comply with, they should do the same with that, in terms of diversity, in terms of equality. I don't think I've seen anything from the RIBA. I mean, there are statements that they've issued, but in terms of obligation for practices who are RIBA accredited, there isn't anything really.
And that's a question to everyone, to the whole public,
I
really.
actually would like to answer that question. So I'm an international student, right? And I grew up in Dubai, which is primarily a Muslim country. So I've never faced xenophobia or racism in my life until I came to London. And it was just about the time of when the ISIS attacks were happening in Paris and Belgium. And every time I would go on the transport, literally no one would sit next to me. No one would sit next to me. We had someone follow us all the way home and call us terrorists. I had my neighbor be sexist and harassing me for like 6 months in the final year of my university. There was a lot. But I don't know how that, I mean, it affected the way I worked in architecture, but I don't know how that is in the architecture industry specifically, because I haven't worked in London as much as I have worked in India or Dubai, where there is primarily a Muslim majority. So I think others would probably be, better at telling us about the practice and discrimination in practice.
Can I just add to that? I was born and bred in London, but I found constantly being visibly Muslim very difficult in architecture in particular. So going to university, I didn't see many people who looked like me in architecture. I don't think I came across another hijabi in first year. And I think with that, you realize that there's something wrong in architecture. The architecture has a problem with race because all the other departments, law, psychology, business, were a lot more diverse, and I saw a lot more Muslim women there. But in architecture, I didn't. And you realize that even with this lack of diversity comes a lack of maybe understanding of different cultures. So at uni, I did have someone, another student, who I never reported, but used to send me Islamophobic comments. And when I was doing my year out as a part one, I remember being in a client meeting where there was, subcontractors, contractors, and everyone in the room was a white male except me. So I remember someone decided that they were going to say hi to me in Arabic, but in like a very broken Arabic. He was English, obviously, but I thought it was so rude of him to kind of greet everyone with hello, but with me, he decided that he was going to kind of amplify the fact that I looked different from everybody else. And, you know, so I think there's a real lack of diversity, and I think a lack of diversity generates more lack of diversity, because I also met loads of people from my school, which is very diverse, Muslim women, who were just discouraged by what they saw, you know? So they were like, well, obviously I'm not going to meet people like me. I'm not going to be able to relate to other Muslim women. I'm not going to meet Muslim women I can be friends with, and so on. So, and that's the thing, you know, you should be able to go to a practice or to university and be able to make friends within that department. But I think a lot of times people from minority backgrounds feel like they can't, they're not welcome. They feel like they're not welcome because the lack of diversity must mean, well, this is not a space for me. And so I saw a lot of people drop out. I saw a lot of people never end up applying to architecture from my school, which was very disheartening. But yeah, so that's been my experience.
And also after part one, it is so important for graduates to find jobs, and being from, you know, the other side, in practices, I remember they had a quota, and the quota, if they were taking, because I worked in large practices, they're taking 10 part ones, there will be one person who would tick that box of diversity. So, you know, immediately, if you're someone from BAME background, you're fighting not only, I mean, you could have amazing portfolio, but that wouldn't count, because they're just interested in just filling one person, you know, to tick that box. And immediately people drop out. I know a lot of students who didn't want to do architecture after part one because getting the right experience was hard.
I remember so Reem and I, we hosted the Mega Crit 2 years ago at the University of Westminster, and one of the panel discussions that we hosted had primarily all women and all women of color, and there was one white man. And I don't know why, but at the time we were constantly getting complimented for the diversity that we focused on. And to us, it was just, oh, we found these amazing women that were doing amazing things and we wanted everyone to know them, but we were constantly getting complimented. And I know they meant it as a compliment, but it was really odd for some reason. Like it is, I don't know what you think about it, Reem, but it always bothered me.
The elephant in the room was the fact that 2 Muslim women had organized this.
Exactly. Yeah, but to go back to Rayan's point about how there aren't any people that look like you in university. For us, we were so lucky to be at Westminster because there were so many Muslim women and people of color that existed. I think Westminster boasts like 65% being BAME. There's a statistic somewhere there.
Yeah.
But we constantly talked about how, despite being so diverse in our student population, we didn't see that same sort of diversity in the university staff, or maybe even when we went to the master's group or when we went to part 3, it was almost at part 1, everyone kind of stopped. And then when you look up, you're like, oh, who do I look up to? Who do I refer to that's from my background that I can aim, or that position that I can aim for? Shahid was definitely one of the tutors that I feel like all the people of color, all the hijabis, all the Muslim kind of flock to Shahid's studio. That's what I feel like, because they relate to him for being Muslim and for being a person of color, whereas everyone else is just purely white. I don't know what you think about that, Shahid. Do you actually notice that happening?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think it varies year on year. I mean, there are some years where there's more sort of Muslim or students of color than other years. I noticed that actually when I sort of phrase my, it's going off topic slightly, so I won't go into it too much, but when I sort of phrase my studio setup as being to do with culture or migration or identity, then you get more students of colour because somehow, I don't know, but people think that students of colour think that that's an issue for them, whereas other students might not think that culture and identity is an issue for them. So sometimes it varies depending on how the studio is phrased as well. But yeah, I have wondered whether there's a sense of safety when I do get quite a high number of sort of Muslim students. I think, and I don't think it's either a good or a bad thing, but I just wonder whether there's a sense of there's some sort of a sense of being somehow understood or acknowledged is kind of driving people, rightly or wrongly driving people towards the studio.
We've got some.
I think it definitely is. Go on.
No, sorry.
I think it definitely is the sense of safety and sense of belonging when you see another person of color in such a white-dominated realm. I definitely chose your studio for that reason, because that first year was kind of a culture shock, and I didn't know sort of where to go. And then from your studio is where I met all the people that I'm still friends with today, who understood me and stuff like that. So, and like I've mentioned before, that you changed my perspective on architecture, because I came from a very, very weird developer kind of sense of architecture. And I don't know, yeah, it was great. Thanks for your studio. Appreciation.
I wanted to ask quickly, before we move on to the comments, what advice would you give to someone that's thinking of pursuing a career in architecture? So someone that's in college at the moment and they're thinking of pursuing a career in architecture, what would you say? All those that have spoken, or anyone who's in the audience here at the moment.
Can I start?
Yeah, go. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that if they're at university, first of all, I completely empathize the fact that it's a very strange times for students, and they're getting a very different experience as compared to us when we went through university. But just think about the bigger story. Just think about the bigger picture of why you wanted to be an architect, and hold on to that, and keep working hard, because this pandemic will end and you will need a really good portfolio. So keep working on the portfolio, and practices will still be recruiting after the pandemic. So don't be disheartened if you can't get a job immediately, but keep working hard towards, just be focused. And you might find that you're not able to go to the studio as much and it will be online, but it is still, the opportunities are still there for you to have that focus, and don't lose sight of your passion of becoming an architect, because things will hopefully get back to normal, even if it takes a year or two, and you will find the job with that practice. So you need to prepare now with your portfolio and with your CV. To be focused.
I'd just like to say, I think it's important for young women and young people who come into architecture, if it's something that they find enjoyable and it's what they want to have as an creative outlet, it's just good to remember that it's not an easy ride, but if you really enjoy it, it is worth it, and you have to put 100% into it. Like anything good, it takes immense hard work. And, at the end of it, it may be what you want to pursue, it may not, but you've learned and grown so much on that journey. So it's important to give it your best shot. Like, when you're younger, you may be lacking confidence or life experience or things that you may think, oh no, I do or don't want to do. But if architecture is something you want to pursue, I would just say just go for it, but try your best and do everything to make sure that you refine your skill set, you learn the presentation skills, or you learn to be that diverse person. And it's not about sort of just proving or fitting into something that you feel too comfortable in. Because for myself, I grew up in Oxford, and we have a very mixed say diversity with everyone. And when I went to architecture school, I was the only hijabi in my year, but it wasn't about me kind of fitting in. It's about my architectural journey and learning and just bettering myself and just being resilient to it, because it's not an easy career path to follow, and you have to have a thicker skin, and that comes with time. But there are so many great moments in this industry, and initiatives like this, which haven't existed before, really give you more dialogue and discussion, which I think is very important for young people and for experienced people to all just have more discussion, which can take us further in our architecture, and not just to be set in like, okay, this is the route I have to take, or this is the way I have to work, or you have to work for this long for this person. There are lots of options now. So I think as long as the creativity and the passion and the drive's there, just go for it. Why not?
I'm going to read some comments on the side, just kind of so they don't get lost behind. But okay, so we've got Zoya Gul said, I was once told by someone in architecture school during my master's that it was refreshing to meet someone like me because I was apparently so unlike a Muslim. Quite strange. Nuria said, I cannot speak for every Muslim woman, but for example, in my personal experience, I find that wearing a hijab makes some non-Muslim people have the instant assumption that I am very reserved or too religious. So their responses can be very awkward because they feel they need to speak to me differently for some reason. I can't really find any other explanation as to why it makes people uncomfortable for a woman to simply cover her hair. Lucy Bambas said, I reverted to Islam in my final year of my bachelor's, and as a British white female, the difference in how I was treated as a white woman and as a woman wearing hijab was very noticeable. I have always been aware of my privilege as a white woman, but this really highlighted this for me. I had a job offer at a firm which I no longer feel comfortable accepting because when they gave me the offer, I was not wearing hijab. The firm had 60 employees, all of which are white, and many expressed Islamophobic views. One of my first conversations with one employee was if I voted Leave or Remain Brexit and my views on immigration. Sahar Patan said, personally feel there is this constant need to prove yourself or to be taken seriously, whether that's in architectural education or profession, because of the preconceived views certain people have. It can be exhausting.
I'd like to make a comment. Me and Tahin, we talked about how before taking any job up or before applying to any job, we would actually go through the
the teams, yeah,
and completely write off any firms that didn't have any people of color or had one person of color. The first criteria was whether they had a hijabi, then it was whether they had anyone with a Muslim name, then it was at least whether they had any person of color with any other name than Tom, Dick, and Harry. If none of those existed, then that firm was a no-go. Like, there's no way you're going to get the job there. So you wouldn't even bother applying. And it was ridiculously very, very, very common. It's not easy finding a firm that you can kind of relate to or want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add and say that I think for a college student, my advice would be to do the research, only because I still believe teachers, and that's not their fault, but teachers sometimes at schools don't have the experience or knowledge to make architecture an available, career choice, or give advice on what A-levels they should do and what portfolio they should submit for interviews and so on. So I'd say do your research, but also don't be disheartened. So like I said before, you know, I didn't meet people who look like me, but I believe everyone should have that kind of university experience. University should still be fun, is what I'm trying to say. The whole uni experience, social side should still be fun. And actually I had the most amazing university experience despite those experiences. I could have done uni for 15 years, no problem. And so I'd say that, you know, don't be disheartened by it. But also you are going to have to do, I think, a little bit more research than someone else, because, you know, each uni teaches it slightly differently, and there's a lot of diversity in how the curriculum works in architecture. I don't think I would have had the same experience, for example, at Westminster, or I might have not developed the same portfolio with. That's fine, but that means you've just really got to do your research, because the league table can't help you in when you're talking about a subject that can be so subjective.
What do you think online platforms like MWA or Architecture Foundation or any other online platform that support people in the industry, what can we do to help people with this part of this research that you were talking about? How can we help students in secondary school or students in college? What sort of content do you think that we should produce to help these, you know, young girls?
I think maybe talking about your journey through UCAS, from like kind of A levels, maybe even track it back slowly to GCSEs, what you had to do to get into architecture, because it isn't always easy, but because it's a design-based project, a lot can rely on that portfolio that you present during your interviews. So it's not a matter of just like, here I got A's and that's it. And the beautiful thing about, I think, architecture is that you have kind of a different opportunity. I didn't do that well with my A-levels, but because I had a good enough extensive portfolio, I managed to get into Greenwich. And that kind of transformed things for me. So, and that doesn't have to be something that's just from A-level art or anything like that. It can be a portfolio or a hobby that you work on. And I think if people talked about that more, I wish I knew those things. You know, I just kind of winged it. But if I knew those things, I might have been able to submit a better portfolio. Or, you know, there's no harm in working your portfolio after A-levels, after exams. So I think if people talked a bit about their experiences more, and just kind of give advice to these people, because I couldn't find that when I was in school.
I think also maybe we as organizations, we actually need to reach out to schools and integrate with them and actually offer advice. We need to actually go in person physically and offer these kind of advices. Because I remember we used to have assemblies in school about so many different topics, but never about career paths and diverse ones. So
yeah.
And the best person that you could talk to about architecture would be your art teacher, and they would know so much about it. So I think, organizations like us definitely need to, you know, get involved with schools and colleges as well, and you know, educate. Well, not educate, like inform the students. You know, this is a career path that you can go down if you're interested in it. And I think there's a lack of that at the moment. There are stuff like that going on, but I think there needs to be more.
Yeah, I think if everyone, I've gone back to my school to talk about my journey, and I think that helped them out a lot. It meant that the teachers didn't have to kind of rely on just what they know about the subject, but actually get someone who's gone through that experience and explain it to art students. And you can kind of see like people's brain, you know, students' brains ticking and think, oh, okay, actually, you know, I might think about that. I might go research that when I go home. So I think if everyone kind of like went back to their schools and just spent half a day doing that, that would help out.
And also being visible again, being a role model. Because when I was at school and we had a career day, I we had a presentation from an architect, and he was a white male. So I mean, that didn't stop me from studying architecture. But if you girls were there doing that presentation, I would be, you know, I wouldn't have all those sort of lack of confidence in entering it, because I was entering this journey of studying architecture, not quite sure it's for somebody of me, somebody of color, a woman, a Muslim woman, and I found that when I was in my first year, it was the most miserable time of my life, because like Rayan, I had the same experience. I didn't see anyone who was like me, and I just didn't have any friends. It was very sad, actually. So I had to think outside the box and make friends through the societies. So there would be other people studying other subjects who I could relate to more. But yeah, so it's just, I think you being that platform and liaising with secondary schools or colleges, when students are thinking about their career path, I think it would be really inspirational, because you be that role model that they could, you know, relate to. So yeah, definitely go for that.
I think with like going back to schools, like secondary schools and colleges, and talking about experiences, we definitely want to be realistic about our experience. We can't paint an amazing picture saying that architecture is amazing and this, that. We need to be honest, you know, the struggles and the positives, because, you know, you don't want these girls to go in and then a couple years down the line they realize, actually, this is a lot more difficult than I thought. So I didn't have anyone in school that told me about their experience in architecture, and, you know, my bachelor's was really difficult, and there were so many times I thought, you know, this is not the career path that I want to go down. It's really challenging.
And tutors tell you as well,
yeah,
maybe it's not for you.
Yeah, exactly. I remember in first year hearing stories about people being told by critiques that, you know, I don't think you're cut out to be an architect. In your first ever crit, in your first year, you know, that is just horrible. You don't want that. And, you know, especially being from a person of color, being not white, and then being told that, you know, you're not actually
like you're already vulnerable.
Yeah,
in that
exactly. And, you know, putting your work up on the wall, it takes a lot of courage. And then
I relate with
the
that.
work is rubbish and you're not cut out for the industry in your first year, in your first ever crit. That is horrible. I think a lot of, you know, universities are a bit more mindful about that now, but I think in the past they weren't as much. And it's not, I don't think it was tutors that are in the university. It was like external critiques would come in and they would make these comments, and it's not nice. It's really not nice, and it scares you. And you hear, oh, so-and-so you know, had this experience, and you would hear like rumors would just spread throughout the studio and everyone would start freaking out about it. And so, yeah, I think it's a lot better now. People are a lot more mindful about the mental health of architecture students, which is really good. And we need to have these conversations more and be aware of, you know, like little comments like this really do impact us. Yeah.
Especially like you said, if you're someone from color or a minority who's trying to already fit in within the group of people you're dealing with, you already feel vulnerable. So for someone to even make that comment just like throws you back.
Yeah. Even
like you're already trying to build your confidence in that sense, and it can shatter you at times.
So imposter syndrome, we spoke about this in another Majlis, and you know, Sana, you brought it up. So yeah, imposter syndrome from like the very beginning, you know, you suffer from it. So many of us suffer from it, and it's difficult. Like even if you're further down in your career, you know, you suffer from it as well. And I don't know how we can, as platforms, online platforms and support networks, how can we help get rid of that, or like help people that suffer from that? Any tips or any points that you guys would want to bring up? Any advice that you would give of how we can tackle that?
Sorry to keep hogging the mic, but I think sometimes just having MWA is great, just the name, you know, alone, the platform. tells me that there are other people like me in architecture. But it means that also that you have someone that you can message, you know, potentially talk to and be like, look, this has been my experience as someone who's graduated, you know, RIM, you've graduated. If part one could potentially message you or, you know, email you guys with these issues. That alone, I think, is something that would help big time. Because you can't always find that, because of the lack of diversity, you can't always find that kind of support in your own institution. And so when you have this kind of like sub you know, platform that anyone from any university can use, anyone from any school can use, that's good, I think.
I think we might need to wrap up soon. Sorry to kind of cut it. It was going, the conversation was going great, but I also want to read just really quickly. There's a comment on the side from Drew. I find it interesting when practices or universities make pledges of diversity. And I say this with bias and perhaps naivety, but I believe that these targets can only be fully realized when students see a level of diversity within their teaching and leadership staff. I am not oblivious to the cosmetic values in this. However, it perhaps allows for an opportunity to enliven the architectural discourse because it is not universal. It's great to hear from Zahra now that student body at Westminster is 65% diverse. In 2010, when I started my undergraduate there, we were 5 or so out of 100 people. And someone else said, having gone through the architecture application process at school when teachers don't know so much about the industry and the league tables are very misleading and unreliable, I decided to create a collection of, oh, that's Verera, real and honest opinions by making a Google Doc for recent graduates and current architecture students to fill in. This is shortlisted link to it. Oh, so the link is up there. Verera's created that. I just want to, I think if we're going to end, I'd like to end on just a few more comments that won't take too much time, if that's okay, Rosie. Yesterday we put up on our Instagram, mwa.arch, about wanting to hear more success stories or more celebrate and hear more highlights of journeys in architecture so far. So I'm just going to quickly read those out. So on Instagram, the architectural experiment said, actually learning that architecture can help real people and that amazing tutors aren't often people you encounter, but when you do, you are amazed at how much you have learned from them and will continue to remember them because of how they treated you in your early days of being naive about your own ideas and potential. They are rare, but you remember them. There were so many tutors that were there, but I think it was just 2 tutors that she encountered. Zahra said, my biggest highlight is the transition from undergrad to postgrad. I had many struggles in undergraduate design, whereas I really enjoyed my postgraduate design modules, and the only solid evident difference between the two was the amount of reading I did. I think theory is overlooked and it should really come hand in hand with design modules. We often forget how limited information we have as students at that state. 0 years of experience in completed projects. And to feed that certain place, I think reading, then discussing these with studio mates and tutors, constantly keeping the conversation going is really inspirational and it feeds the strongest projects. amdesign.lab said, I think the biggest lesson I've learned is actually the power and importance of collaboration in design. Although our studio projects were individual, I had the opportunity to work with an amazing group of women who always thought better to design together rather than design individually. We'd all gather around and hold crits of each other's design, and it was one of my highlights. The same lesson I learned earlier on when I entered this week-long workshop design competition, where I had been paired with 3 other students from different university backgrounds and study levels, and we had to collaborate and sort of meet everyone at their own level. I had just passed my 2nd year, which was both exciting and extremely rewarding. Zoya said, my highlight was me sticking to my belief after multiple breakdowns in architecture school, that there was definitely more to architecture than just making buildings, and that Pakistan badly needed more writers, critics, theorists, historians, curators, researchers, and just generally people who'd be able to broaden the meaning of architectural practice. by making some space for alternative, meaningful modes of creating, thinking, researching. I chose not to work in an architecture firm after I graduated due to multiple reasons, and instead explored my options, which was a huge risk, considering how we don't have many labs, architecture-related publications and such here, and the chances of earning any money through them also next to zero. Eventually, I applied to and got into my dream school. Had been thinking about this master's program since my 3rd year in college, wow, and met an amazing set of mentors at the Bartlett. Peg Rawls, Edward Dennison, David Roberts, Jane Rendell, Polly Gould, Chania Sengupta all helped me immensely, but I think the site writing module led by David, Polly, Jane deserves a very, very special shout out. It was more than just a module in a master's program. It was a safe space for conversation, confessions, questions, warmth, protest, poetry, fiction, feminism, social justice, art, architecture, and just so much more. I'm glad I followed my instincts and trusted myself despite all discouragement I initially got from family, professors, etc. Oof, this is turning into a speech. Maybe this theme calls for another Majlis. These are the comments that we received on our Instagram, and again, like Tumpa, you mentioned earlier that the common thread is taking that risk, and we all need to take these risks, and it's okay not to know where we're going initially when we start this journey. But the beauty of it is the journey itself, and the ups and the downs, and how we basically deal with it. So it's been amazing listening to all of you and listening to all your journeys. They're really, really inspiring. I feel so overwhelmed, like, and emotional about, just hearing all these stories. And yeah, that's kind of all I have to say to end it on that note.